My name is Caleb Webster Alt. This is for firearms inspection, FTT-111, Module 1 assignment. To begin, I want to first verify that my workspace is clear of any live ammunition. I'm going to just do a quick span of my workbench just to show that it is just tools and desk supplies. Second, we will be getting into how to clear a firearm. And the firearm that we are going to be talking about and discussing is my Harrington & Richardson Partner 12 gauge single shot break action. And usually with a firearm they have a safety mechanism, but with this particular firearm it doesn't have a safety mechanism. So usually I'd tell you to remove the feed source and to put the safety on, but in this case we cannot do that. So the correct way to clear a firearm like this is to just make sure to keep your fingers off of the trigger at all times. You're then going to locate your release lever. You're going to release it. Barrel's going to drop down, and if there were a shell in the chamber, it would eject. So that's if your ejector is working. So that is how to clear it. You're going to want to visually also look through the chamber end, all the way through the bore. You know what? Any obstructions, and there's nothing in there, so the camera can see. This firearm is clear. So for the next part, I'm going to demonstrate the process of performing a function check on this firearm while assessing all 8 steps in the cycle of operations. I'll also go over things like the trigger grouping and how the hammer works and all of that. So I have created a dummy cartridge. As you can see, this is a spent casing, as well as the spent primer has been punched out, so you can see right through it. This is a safe shell. This is just to show the extraction/ejection portion of the cycle of operations so that you can visually see it functioning properly. So that's why we have this dummy round here. So to begin, we are going to start off by feeding. So to feed, you have to manipulate your brake lever. So you're going to manipulate that, drop the barrel. You're going to grab your dummy cartridge, and you're going to feed it into the chamber or bore. And then that is when feeding ends. Chambering begins when you manipulate the barrel in the upward position to lock it back in place. So you're going to manipulate this barrel, and now it's chambered. Chambering ends when the lever can lock and rotate. When the barrel rotates, it locks on a hinge pin. So once this barrel comes all the way up in the vertical position and the bore is flat with the face of the firing pin, then it is locked. Especially, you're going to hear an audible click. And locking ends when it has locked in this position. Firing, so if we were to simulate firing, you have to cock the gun manually because this is not an automatic firearm. So we are going to cock, keep your finger off the trigger. Now, even though there's a dummy round in here, this is not a snap cap, so you cannot pull the trigger still. It could still damage the firearm, so I'm not going to do that. But I also will show you, because we are performing a function check while doing all of this. So far, everything is good. We are going to show you, or I am going to show you, that this trigger and hammer and sear mechanism, all this is still functioning properly, even though we can't pull the trigger. So what you're going to do, very carefully, is you're going to put pressure on this hammer before you pull that trigger down. So you're going to put pressure on the hammer, you're going to pull that trigger, and then release the hammer forward just slightly. You can then release the trigger and slowly guide that hammer back to home. If all of that works like you just saw, and it still cocks, realistically, if we had a snap cap in the chamber, we would be able to fire, and you would be able to see that the trigger is functioning properly and that it is releasing, or it is actuating the sear, and the sear is releasing the hammer, allowing the hammer to ride forward, striking the primer. So as you can see, we're just going to put pressure on the hammer again, slightly pull that trigger, let the hammer ride forward slightly, let go of the trigger, and guide it home. So far so good. That is for firing. So everything is functioning just properly so far. So when we go into unlocking, you have to, again, manipulate your brake lever. So you're going to push this down. You're going to begin to break the barrel. As you can see, that is unlocking. The barrel is unlocked. We have not yet let the shell come out, but that's what we are going to get into. So unlocking ends as soon as this barrel completes its rotating, I don't know what to call it, but it's got to rotate the axis of the hinge pin. Once it passes that hinge pin, it'll then start the extracting, which then causes ejection. Ejection is when the shell casing is thrown out. And so let's start that. So technically extraction is almost happening now because the barrel is broken and it is about to happen. So extracting ends as soon as this shell casing is ejected, and that ejection happens as soon as that is ejected. So let's get into that, and I'm going to shoot it towards the camera, kind of. So as you can see, it popped out with good force, which tells us that the ejector is functioning good and strongly, as it should. And here you can see this is the dummy round. And I'm just going to prove again that it is hollow all the way through. This is a safe round, just to make sure, so everyone knows. And then you're going to go into the cocking, which, because of this style of firearm, we are then going to manipulate the barrel back up, and we are going to also go through the cocking again, which we already previously did in the firing. So let's just go through that again. You're going to manipulate the hammer, and because we are not going to fire this gun because that could damage the trigger mechanism, we are just going to show you how to manipulate it so that you can bring the hammer back home. So apply some pressure to the hammer, very carefully pull the trigger. It's going to let the hammer ride slightly forward. You can then release the trigger and ride that hammer home very gently. So that is the cycle of operations simply for this break action style of firearm. Also, we performed a very simple functions check on this gun. So let's go over the function check. So this gun, as it is designed, there is no safety, as you can see. You simply have a release lever, your hammer, and then the trigger mechanism, and you have an ejector, which some shotguns don't even have an ejector. You have to manually pull the shell out yourself, but this one does. So let's go over that. So the release lever, as you can see, it clearly functions properly, and we know that because, well, the barrel drops down like it should. And the locking mechanism works just fine because we know that the barrel is rotating on the hinge pin as it should, and when it comes all the way to the home position, we can hear a pretty loud audible snap sound of that, it's like, I don't know how to describe it other than, if you were to think of the edge of this shell casing, as it rides over this pin, it is snapping into place. And when you release that lever, it allows it to rotate off of that pin. So we have then now confirmed that the locking function is locking just fine, which shows that it is a safe firing weapon as long as it locks the chamber closed. And we have also made sure to confirm that the hammer and the trigger mechanism and all this is all functioning correctly, and that when we break the barrel, the ejector is ejecting the shell with enough force and inertia that we can tell that it's not, it doesn't need any repair or refurbishing or anything. So from what we can tell with our basic resources that we have at hand right now, that's how you perform a basic function check on a firearm of this type. So let's get into another part. It says, if you do not have access to dummy rounds, please state what you would be expecting, blah, 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 which we do. We have made a dummy round. Additionally, are there creative ways to access the various steps without using dummy rounds or live ammunition? Yes, it says to refer to the textbook, and in the textbook, it does state, like we've talked about, snap caps. Snap caps are awesome. Snap caps are pretty much going to be just like this, but they, for a primer, they have like a little rubber stop, and then on the interior, it's going to have like a spring mechanism, so when the firing pin falls forward and it strikes that primer, it's going to make contact with this, but because of the spring mechanism on the inside, it's going to absorb that inertia that firing pin has applied to it. Therefore, it's going to slow that firing pin down, so it's not damaging your internals. So yeah, a snap cap is a good way to really form a good function check. If you want to test your trigger and see if it's firing properly without damaging the firearm, I would have to say that's the basic and most creative way for anyone to perform a function check on a firearm. I think that is it. We went over our workspace being clear. I showed you how to clear this style of firearm. We went over the cycle of operations, as well as while doing that, we also went over how to perform a function check with the example of a dummy cartridge to show and prove that the ejection is happening like it should. And we also went over the fact that this firearm doesn't have a safety mechanism, and we also talked about the trigger reset and everything. So yeah, I think we covered all topics on this video, and that should be it. Thank you very much.